Kish, and I'm happy to be a member of the Council of Princeton Future. And I welcome you all after what I hope was a very good summer. I can't believe it's kind of winding down. You know, the light is changing in the morning, and the air is changing a bit. So it's time to get back to school, get back to work. Now, you may have noticed that the library is doing a big book sale. And so we're in a new place today. And you know what? That's change. And if we're being philosophical, we would say that life is based on nothing but change. So we also know that the earlier that people get involved in change, the more comfortable they are and the more ways they can help shape the process. So with that in mind, we are excited to pick up where we left off at the meeting in April. How many of you were here for the April meeting where you marked up the maps? Okay, good, and hopefully more people will come. That's great. Many of you came together on that day to get a bird's eye view of Princeton on the maps. Remember the tracing paper that was over the maps, and you were able to identify and mark areas that you thought could be susceptible to change. Well, we're really here today to see the results of your work. And over the summer, Tony Nelson and some of his colleagues looked at what you identified and have put together some results and recommendations. So today we welcome Tony Nelson, who has been teaching urban design and professional practice first at Harvard and then 39 years at Rutgers. He's an award winner multiple times. He's emerged as one of the nation's most respected urban visionaries. And we are so lucky to have him as a resident of Princeton and a member of the Princeton Future Council. So with no further ado, as they say, I will introduce Tony Nelson, who will discuss the 7 areas of potential change from now until noon, okay? And you'll have lots of opportunity to speak. And now
Catherine, thanks. Well, good morning, everybody. It was a really, really interesting experience for me to see the results that were done and then to synthesize those things. Now, if you kind of remember, we laid all these 7 maps on the table. Groups of people went around to each of the sets of maps, and they had about 10-15 minutes on each map. And the next group came in. And after that, the next group came in. So we were able to go through 3 groups of people looking at the maps for the purposes of determine what was the susceptibility to change. Francis, would you just put the lights out back there? So people can see. Now, the agenda for today is really, by the way, we have the whole meeting today will be videotaped. But I want to start basically with an introduction and then a video summary, a kind of a 9-minute video, a 7-minute video summary of what we did from the 2 hours and 2.5 hours we actually worked earlier on. Then I'm going to start with each of the areas. We're going to start with the North Harrison Street area first, show you the results. And what we want for the first time will be 2 questions, you'll see this in a little bit, is did we get it right in the translation of that susceptibility to change? And then the second thing is, what do you think should happen in those particular areas? So it is highly structured to be able to get us through all of these 7 areas, before noon today. And I will say right from the very beginning, there were 7 of these areas. One of the things that people had said to us, well, why didn't you include the rest of the town as a possibility? That certainly could happen at some point in the future, but there was a focus on these specific 7 areas, and then we'll give you some interesting statistics, which you probably all know, but this is pretty interesting. It was interesting for me. As of 2022, we have a population of not quite 32,000. We are roughly 18.1 square miles, or about 11,500 acres of land, of which, by the way, the actual susceptibility to change maps actually included 17% of the town, the rest of it not. And then out of that, about 5% is highly susceptible to change. Median household income, 125,000. It's ranked 83rd across the Garden State. We are not the highest. We are the 83rd highest income. But we've got a lot of residents that are 65 and older, almost 17%, and 8% of our population is lives below the poverty line. Now, 40% of the house in town are rented. I mean, that's 60% are owned, but 40% are rented. And then this was surprising to me. The population of Princeton has actually decreased from 2020 to where we are now. Not by a lot, but it is getting slightly smaller. So with that in mind, the 7 focus areas were laid out, and here they are: the North Harrison first, then Westminster Choir College, Broadbean and Butler, the Witherspoon Corridor, Downtown Area 1, Downtown Area 2, and then Lower Alexander. And what we did is we just laid out those areas. You can see the 7 areas started to appear in blue on the map here that were the focus areas that folks spent their time looking at in great detail. Now, when you compare that to the whole town itself, the focus areas are only about 17% of the town. The general belief was in the design of this layout that what we wanted to do is have enough time for people to look at certain areas more specifically, and these were chosen by, you'll see in the video a little bit, by design, to actually focus on those particular sets of areas. Now, the non-focus areas are all the areas in the yellow here, and it was very interesting that one of the groups actually focused on all of those areas and came up with some general recommendations, but we'll focus primarily on those 7. Now, the overlay mapping turned out to me, really, really interesting. We used 4 colors, and this, by the way, is something I have used in about 400 towns across the United States right before I retired from my firm. The 4 markers are red, orange, yellow, and green. And of course, each of the teams had these set of markers, overlays, and you'll see that in the video in just a little bit. Now, what did the color code mean? The color code meant green, just leave it alone. Yellow, maybe it needs a little work, but not much. Orange was, hey, there's some signs of deterioration here. Something should be looked at over time, and we should probably consider it. And then you had the red. Now, what I found was really interesting is that nobody, or not very few of the teams, used the green or the yellow. They primarily focused on the red and the orange, which I thought was really good. Also saved a whole lot of time because they didn't have to go and mark all the areas which were actually green. Now, this particular little video that's coming up here will give you an idea of exactly what we did. A very short clip.
But Princeton Future is not what's formally called a part of the representative democracy. It is a participatory democracy organization which seeks to get out and actually listen to the residents of Princeton and figure out what they really would like.
We are looking for your opinion. And I really think that, and we all think that we need a specifically tailored approach, obviously, to this extraordinary community that we live in. People love this town, and a lot of people don't want to see it change. Other people would like to see some changes.
The purpose of these maps, as somebody pointed out, do not cover the entire town. And that was by design. The purpose of these maps is to identify sites that are susceptible to change, meaning that people think something different might and possibly should happen there. 90% of the town is really not susceptible to change. The neighborhoods out along the periphery, single-family neighborhoods, large lot zoning, they're really not likely to change in any way. But there are other areas that are sitting there waiting for a better solution to be found. And so in identifying these 7 maps, these maps focus on areas that we think have sites that could, perhaps should, be redeveloped in a different way. And so the purpose of this exercise is for people to identify those sites on their own.
The key one is, let's say, we got green, yellow, orange, and red first. Now, what happens if you go around and say, hey, I don't agree with that? Any additional, what we have found over time is we go around, and if people on the first map agree, we just say, circle it again. If you don't agree, put a little note on the map. And what we will do then is we will synthesize the pieces and bring it back to you the next time with the thing did we get it right? Did you get it right? So you notate, like for instance, if somebody said, I think all this area should be red, the next one puts out, I think the whole area should be green. We have red and green on there going, uh-oh, we got a problem here because half of it's one, half of it's the other. But for the first time, we will know what people think about these particular sites. That really is the key. And really just make the changes however you want to do that. And don't worry if it's messy, and do not hesitate to pick up the markers and draw. The more you draw on these things, the better off it's going to be. And they're going to look messy at the end.
Like a community center order from the line, over to the line, from the art council, the rec department,
They put an overlay on these lots.
That's how this one's fine. I think so, yeah.
Yeah, so maybe they're a little happy sometimes and just, all right, where is this?
That's more than 20 or 40% and so, because the market is totally screwed up. So I think there should be adjustments for the cheapest price.
To extend this side is all green space.
So let's just say this
They
is.
had a plan that got killed like in 2008.
Like you think that this part could be hard? Because they might keep the dense house here.
So after that exercise, which really turned out to be incredible, what we did is we took all of those tracing papers and put them one on top of the other. And then carefully measured each of the pieces. Now, again, just for the designations is two responses from you guys today, if possible. One is, we're going to show you exactly how you translated, but we cleaned it up. Because these maps, as I said, were really messy, but beautifully messy. They look like beautiful drawings, I thought, at the end. The question is, did we get it right? Did we get it right in terms of the pieces? And if you think any of these pieces had changed, that would be, now is the time to do it. And again, remember, we're going to go through these these very quickly, the seven areas. The second one is what should happen to these areas? I mean, this is really the big question. As you know, every piece of property in town is controlled by zoning. I mean, that's pretty clear. And the question is, if you designated, if this group of people designated an area as highly susceptible to change, which is the things that I think we are most interested in, the question is, what should they be changed to? Now, again, what is fascinating for me is that that second question was partially answered by some people. They just put little notes on it. But for most of the purpose of the map itself, it meant that somehow or another we need to change the existing zoning. And the zoning needs to be changed in maybe subtle ways or not so subtle ways, which is both land use in terms of what's allowed on it, and then of course the rules and regulations by which something gets built. Now, there are really still two Princetons, which is really quite surprising to me. I was at the city council meeting last Monday when they talked about parking, and they're still referring to the town as the borough and the township, because they never consolidated the zoning. The zoning still sits as two pieces. So you got the old borough and the old township, but there's a third one. And the third one are all the E-zones. The E-zones are all the university pieces, all of the Westminster Choir College, what have you. They're all in E-zones, which is almost a separate little piece of it. Now, this is the township overall zoning map. Very complex, very difficult to read, and having done the planning for the Witherspoon-Jackson area, which is part of the old borough, but also part of the town, 95% of the buildings in the Witherspoon-Jackson area are non-conforming, which means they do not meet the existing zoning. They're just either too big, too small, or what have you. Now, in addition to that, then there is this piece of it. This is the old zoning for the borough. And it's still referred to as a separate, and it's pretty clear that when you start to think about what's going to happen in the future, the zoning needs to be changed in order to pull things either more into conformance or secondly, entirely new issues. So let me start first with probably the easiest one. As you know, on North Harrison Street, there's the shopping center, and if you've been going by North Harrison, you can see that the drugstore is coming out of the ground right now, a little pad on Harrison Street. And in the back corner of the site itself, this corner back here is where there's approval for a series of new housing units. And then Thornay Circle is also almost completely constructed at this point. Now, here's what people showed us. They said to us the entire area is an area in need of redevelopment, and I believe that the redevelopment plan has already been approved by the township, so you were very, very, very right on that. Interesting comment was, is it possible to leave the center green? And I thought that was pretty interesting. But also look at the Thornay Circle. One came up as highly susceptible to change. But then some of those big office buildings there, people also said, hey, there's a possibility that these should be up for grabs. There's been something more should happen on that site. Now, one of the things that's pretty interesting about this is that the majority, and I would not say all of it, but the vast majority of things in these commercial areas are parking lots. And the question is, for many of us, that parking lots are like the land banks of the future. What do you do with all of these parking lots that are out there? So now, so this is the red. And then the second susceptibility was the moderate susceptibility, again, startling in some respects, that the second level were the three properties you see here, but the entire side of North Harrison Street came up as a possibility. Now, then the other things that people suggested were bike paths. That came up as one of the changes they would like to see made would be the additional bike paths. So that is pretty clear. Now, just to give you some idea of how much land we're talking about here, and these are just the red sites. That's all we could calculate at this point. 34 acres for the shopping center site. and approximately 14 acres on the other side of it. Now remember, the town has got 19,000 acres in it. And although it looks like a big impact, there's a relatively small areas. The little scale up above is a scale that we use to actually measure it. So that little blue scale is 7/8 of an acre. Now, the things that people had said, the second question was, okay, we've got all this stuff. What do we do with it? And here's where I think I would really like to get some input from you guys if possible. It's clear that we kept the new bike lanes in as part of it. We got a couple little notes on there, which I translated. Somebody thought it'd be good to have a dog park. And other people thought it would be a good place for a dinky stop. But that was it. That's all we got. Now, there were some general comments literally put on almost every map. And those general comments were, allow ADUs, if you know, that's accessory dwelling units. Allow accessory dwelling units everywhere. Add bike paths and lanes, and more mixed-use affordable housing. That seemed to have been a theme that has gone through, and of course, that's sort of what is happening at the shopping center site now. So, my first question to you is, what do you think? What do you think should happen out here beyond the corner, which is going to have the Texas Donut in, and here on the corner is it's a pad site for a new drugstore. Any ideas in terms of what you think should happen here? Yes.
Sorry, Tony, just a quick question. Why 0.7/8 of an acre?
Oh, that's just that's my personal scale to be able to measure it. So I had some visual relationship to the area.
Probably metric, right?
No. This is on PowerPoint. So it was a grid we put on top of it to actually get an approximation. And these are all approximate numbers. Okay, any thoughts about what should happen out here? Yes.
I'm concerned about bike paths. I think it's great, we need them, but I don't understand what the zoning is about what kind of vehicles can be on the bike paths, because safety on sidewalks is becoming an issue.
Oh, indeed it is. Indeed it is. Inside a zoning ordinance or a form-based code, typically there would be street sections. The new zoning codes have street sections inside of it, so there would be street sections for what they call A, B, C, and D streets. That's how they typically classify them. And as part of that section would be, how are you going to deal with bike paths? Now, bike is an issue in town, as we know. I mean, it's a big deal, whether we have parking on it, to take the parking away. And that's not yet been resolved, and I assume that before that, the master plan will come up with one, and then sooner or later, once the master plan is in place, I assume the town will let out another major contract for the zoning, and at that point, I think the street sections will include or not include the bike paths as it is.
Will they include scooters and skateboards, or is?
No, I would suspect that they would. I would suspect that they would at this point.
And that's the zoning board that does that?
No, it would be, at this point, it would be the city council who would approve a new zoning ordinance.
City council, okay.
Typically the way it goes is you get the master plan, that's approved by the planning board. Then the town would hire another consulting firm to rewrite the zoning or to do the overlays on the zoning, and that has to be approved by city council. So it's a double-step process. Okay, any thoughts about?
Yes,
Sure.
Comment about the bike paths. So, couple of notes. So, in part, bike paths. I had kids, and before they were 12, I just simply wouldn't allow them to ride on the road. So roads here are narrow.
Yep.
They were on the sidewalks. But what I find strange is, you go to Amsterdam, they have a road. The bikes are not in the road. They're on the sidewalk. The sidewalk is split in two. If I look, for example, at Valley, where you want to put it, I don't understand. They just went through this whole process of forcing the homeowners to put sidewalks on both sides of the street. There was a fight about that. I don't understand why, for example, one of those sidewalks couldn't be dedicated to bike path. So you don't have to remove the trees, widen the street.
Right.
So I think that part of what's going on is we tend to not look at dual use. I think, yes, I understand when I'm older, I don't want to be on the road with kids riding skateboards and things on the sidewalk. But I can clearly see that you can split the sidewalks or make the sidewalks bigger rather than taking parking away from the street. So I think one of the problems that I see is people don't have dual use. The other thing I've noticed is like this dog park. First of all, it's a very bizarre American, I'm American now after 30 years, that dogs have to be on leashes. I don't understand. You go to Europe, dogs are off a leash, they're well behaved.
Right.
For example, now they want to put a dog park there.
Well,
People are gonna
again,
drive
these
here.
are just suggestions
Yes, I know,
that
but I
people have
mean,
made.
There are a lot of
Right.
parks in Princeton.
Right.
You could, for example, have between, say, 9 and 12 dogs off leash. The kids
Right.
are in school.
Interesting.
And then people don't have to drive to a dog park. They don't have to be dedicated space.
Right.
I feel like there's just not enough creative thinking. It's like, okay, let's zone this.
Okay.
Now let's force it on people. The other
Okay.
comment I made specifically about Harrison,
Sure.
you said you were stunned that these are homes, and people are saying, oh, they need to be redeveloped. Those are actually some of the only affordable houses left in Princeton,
Mhm.
because they're smaller. I was at that point, and at that table, and the comment came up, and people are saying, yes, they see that things can be changed, but that doesn't necessarily mean a change in the density. It means that those
That's
houses
right.
could be replaces. So I think
Sure.
when you look at these two things, people need to be very careful about what they say. Things should be changed to better versus, oh, they should be upzoned for density.
Got it. Sure, no, makes perfectly good sense.
Question back here, Tony.
Yes.
Yeah, basically, when I see that many parking spaces, okay, and I see a one-story structure, I see room for lots of expansion, and lots of ideas in terms of density, housing, use of that space.
You know, it's a mantra that I've used in my entire professional career, that surface parking lots are the land banks of the future. And I think they chose this one particularly, I'll go all the way back to the original photograph. They chose the first phase of this in that back corner, primarily because nobody ever parks there. I mean, these things were designed at 5 parking spaces for 1,000 square feet of retail. And now, especially with things beginning to change, and if the next Princeton Future meeting is going to talk about transit, we need to talk about transit. If transit comes into place, then everything begins to change in terms of people's capability of being able to move around the town without a car. That's going to become critical. And then all these parking spaces in some cases become irrelevant. And then they become even more available. But you're absolutely right.
When that shopping center opened, there was a large department store and 2 full grocery stores.
Right.
So talk about traffic.
Yes.
Much less today.
Oh, yeah. No, well, look.
One more question here.
Sure.
Josh?
Yes, Josh.
I was just gonna say that if you go to your other diagram, which, you know, the last one you showed, the susceptible to change with the bike paths, you know, I guess the question is really, when you talk about this, is it susceptible to change, or is the question that whether it should change? Because all the areas in red, except the one on the bottom left, you know, like you said, they're under construction. I know that as part of the approval plan for the one that's on, was it Terhune there, has a dog park included in their plan.
Mm-hmm.
You know, has pathways cutting through it so that people could circulate through the project. You know, those projects have been approved. It would be interesting to see sort of what this part of town is going to look like with all.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Oh, absolutely. It would be great to be able to do that as a kind of a sketch idea in terms of, we were hoping to get the ideas here and then maybe start to do some kind of preliminary sketches and just kind of incorporate the things which are there right now. But you're absolutely right. Yes.
So, I don't know how many people here have school-age children, but you cannot live in Princeton without a car and have your children play a sport, or do a sport, or participate in activities. That's not reality. So, I like the idea of bike lanes, but I live just on the north side of this map.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not biking to McCaffrey's to feed my family of 5. That's
Mhm.
not a thing I'm gonna do. I couldn't even carry the milk.
Right.
So I hope, I like what you said about the transit concept, because on that left side, we're gonna have 200, 300 families or
Right,
homes,
right.
90 seniors, but seniors need to get around to.
Sure, exactly.
In the shopping center, if we add 200 homes, those are homes.
Mm-hmm.
I moved here from New York City, and you have 2 or 3 kids, you're gonna have 2 cars in that family, and the minute your kid turns 17, there's another car coming in the family. I have
Right.
3
You're
kids,
right.
I have 5 cars.
Yeah.
Everybody is going left, right, and center, so I think we need to think about how we live, and transportation is a really big deal.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think the next focus for Princeton Future is going to be on open space. The one after that's on transit, and it's transit, walking, bicycle, cars, parking. Those are all together. It's clear. I mean, you're not going to go to a Caffrey's and walk back. Maybe my wife would, but very few other people.
No, I do, doesn't
I have.
What?
We do.
Yeah.
You do? Yeah, I do too.
Sure, my kids bike there, I mean, we've lived in Princeton 22 years, and more often than not, when my kids were going to the shopping center, they would walk or ride their bike. I mean, that was, honestly, that's why we lived in Princeton, because having that kind of freedom for our family.
Okay, now, I know that, remember, we've got 6 more of these, we got 6 more of these to go through. So let me, thank you for the input we got on this one, but then, now let me move on to the next one. The next one is the Westminster Choir College. I mean, essentially this part of town. Now, as we kind of looked at it, I mean, you guys got a sense of it, of Walnut. The high school is up above. Hamilton, you can see it's curved in the front. You got Franklin Boulevard, you got North Harrison Street, and it links at the bottom right-hand side is the area, the parking area of the shopping center. So these 2 maps slightly overlaid each other. Now, here was what came up first. Of course, we know that from our previous discussion. But then the old first aid and the 2 houses that they own, that's also now highly susceptible to change. I don't know what the plans are for that one, but that certainly is out there. Then what was fairly interesting is that in the various groups, everybody thought this portion of the Westminster Choir College should be redeveloped in some form or another. That's one where the town is now using as the parking for overflow employee parking. But on some of the other maps, it included the entire site itself. But on this particular one, it included half of it. Then it started to pick up interesting little pieces here, there, and everywhere. But what was fascinating to me is that certain portions of it in the previous map were orange, and on this map, North Harrison Street primarily went red. So there is a lot of thought about what should happen on North Harrison Street, from Nassau Street all the way down to the shopping center. So it was really interesting to see so much focus being put on North Harrison Street. And again, people were very specific about looking at specific little lots, and also, again, included bicycle paths. But this one was even as interesting. It said, can you actually make a connection to extend that street to Harrison Street? Again, a comment that appeared several times on the maps itself. Now, when we actually look at that map, you can see that the lot up above on the choir college is about 13 acres, and you can see the various acreages from the other pieces. So now, what should happen? Let's start first with the choir college piece of it. Now, it's clear that's been in litigation. There's thoughts of certain people going to buy it, but the reality is that that site sits there, and you all told us that that site was one that was highly susceptible to change. What do you think should happen there, or could happen there, or might happen there?
Can you tell me again where the choir college is?
It's this piece right here. Sorry, get it? This piece, here's this piece right here.
It's 180 degrees to the last map.
Yeah.
All right,
This space here, the high school is right up above. So it's this piece right here.
That's what, I always look at this
The other direction.
180 degrees.
Yeah, so here is the front end when you come down Hamilton Street. There's that big lawn, the beautiful lawn. This is the cupola. And what was interesting is they carved it around and left the library. But all the rest of it fell into highly susceptible to change. So what do you think happens there? Josh?
I'm sorry, just a quick question. So there wasn't a do not alter put on the lawn and the campus?
No, Josh, what's really interesting about this one is that the next group, which I'll show you, that overlaps the other one, they thought it should be, we should do something with the front end. But this particular group that did this particular map over the 3 groups that did it, only focused on this particular piece. You get these little idiosyncrasies, but I just wanted to be completely honest and say, hey, here's what people told us, and so that's what we did. So this group is saying, focus on the back half of it, and primarily along North Harrison Street. So what might be some of your thoughts on this one? Yes?
It should not be turned over to Avalon Bay.
Could I make one comment?
Oh, but absolutely.
Given that you've looked at the population, what are the projections for the second high school in the next 10 to 15 years? Are we going to have one?
I think the school is now going through a master planning process.
But
I
based
have
on
no
what
idea what they're going to do. Right now,
even the
obviously the
affordable housing
population is
projections,
decreasing.
even with affordable housing.
Well,
we're gonna
then
have
all
to-
that has to be calculated in as part of this overall big master plan.
Because I think that's
Yeah.
what's really. a
Okay,
big
so
part of
one
that.
thought is that the expansion of the high school should happen there, and that might be a really good place for the extension of the high school, or another high school, however they want to go. So that's really one good suggestion. Any other thoughts?
Well,
Sure.
I actually thought it'd be really cool if we closed Walnut Street.
Speak up,
in
please.
that section.
Can you speak up?
Oh, I thought it would be an interesting idea to think about closing
We'll
Walnut
go back.
Street.
Walnut Street is the one between, is
The
the
high
one that's
school.
right in back of the high school.
Yeah, and,
Right now.
and, because, the middle school is on the other side of Walnut, and it would create almost a campus-like
campus-like feeling.
setting. And at one time, they were gonna take the Valley Road building down and make that a school.
Mhm.
That was like, you know, a couple of years ago when the school board was looking at that, and they came to the town with a big, I guess, bond thing. And, but to me, it makes more sense to cluster, if there was to be any other type school built, it makes more sense to cluster it and make this sort of campus-like setting
Okay.
for our schools, and leave Valley Road, which I'm sure is also one of those susceptible sites, you know, make that more, you know, more
Okay.
commercial housing.
Okay, other thoughts?
Yeah, I agree. I think that you concentrate perhaps all of the public school education in that area. I also recognize the need for us to consider more dense housing. That would appear to me to be an ideal spot, given this central location for sort of mixed income housing, market rate and more affordable. Yet, in all of this, I do wonder to what extent are we aware of, or can we consider or engage with larger economic actors in the area? And I'm thinking primarily the university, given its girth, given its relative size to the rest of the town. And what do we know about its development? And you know, what will the student population be in the future? How many more professors are going to be bringing into town, and with them children and so on? And is the right hand speaking to the left hand, essentially? Are we aware of what the growth might be going forward due to large economic actors such as the university and others that we need to consider as well? And how do we incorporate what are we talking about planning here that is absent any input as to what might occur, notwithstanding our planning, given the growth in the community or further shrinkage?
Well, to me, in order to answer those questions, that's a master plan issue. I mean, clearly it's a master plan issue. I mean, the two questions that were asked about the expansion of the school system, one is really a big deal.
That's key.
The second one, the expansion of the university and what their future plans are, is certainly a part of this whole equation as well. There's no doubt about that. And so a master plan's role is to do that. This one simply said, where do you think stuff should change, or where should we have growth? It's amazing to me that, you know, we've got these beautiful areas now, and, you know, you're the first one to suggest one. I just suggested that, you know, we close the street and create a campus. maybe you can incorporate both of those things. But you're right, the master plan is going to have to go through a population projection stuff over a period of time. That's the function of the master plan. Now, quite frankly, I don't know about you, but I haven't heard one peep about the master plan. I don't know, I have no idea what the status of the master plan is. I know that a big contract has been given out to a company and say will be. But we should start to find that out. This simply says, these are the areas where the folks who participated thought we should have some kind of change or growth or however, whatever.
I could-
Curtis,
I
you're
could
right, it's a really a good question.
Just another quick comment on that. Just the previous one, I was not here at the April meeting, and I agree with what was isolated, demonstrated, discussed there. I thought it was excellent.
Currently, the master plan is underway, and they do have a steering committee, subcommittee. Emma Rigaud of Princeton Future, there's Emma, is a member of the steering committee, a bunch of other people in town, people from the university. And so it's underway. The next steering committee meeting is September
28th.
8th. Yeah. September 28th. Yeah, Alvin. Oh, Alvin is on the steering. Are you on the steering committee?
Yeah.
Yep, there you go. Alvin, you're formerly
Well,
of Princeton Future.
I'm actually on the subcommittee, which is part of the steering committee.
Okay,
So,
all right, so we can buttonhole Alvin as well.
In terms of community involvement, right now, they had a survey that was run over the summer, and there's a new one coming out this fall that's kind of a consumers survey to really hear people's ideas about the town. So it's an extension of these Princeton Future meetings, so definitely look out. I think through social media, there's the website as well for the master plan, where you can get links to these surveys, and definitely fill them out, please.
Okay.
Can I make one last comment?
Sure, of course.
Since it's on tape. One of the questions about high school is you can either have a mega high school, which is not great for a lot of kids. You can use the resources more effectively, but then you have this huge flow of traffic every morning. It's bad enough already.
Mhm.
The other one is to have a second high school, maybe where the Valley Road is accessible from 206.
Right.
There's a lot of duplication, but the schools are better. You don't end up with, essentially big city high schools. So to your point, the school board really needs to decide what the vision is. 2 high schools, 1 mega high school, 1 campus, multiple campuses.
Yeah, the funny thing was when they were looking at it, they weren't looking at a second high school. They were looking at a
Middle school.
sort of a, what was it, 5 through
5 and 6.
5 and
junior
6
school.
school. And that's why I think it could be a campus, but that's also why I think if you close that street, maybe you, there definitely needs to be thought about it for sure. But the other thing is that the rec department is constantly looking for playing fields. There's a lot of pressure in Princeton for more playing fields, and I know even the schools, I feel like they lack that kind of open space playing fields that could be used by the community, but also by the school system. So, if you
So
do
playing
make-
fields should become part of that recommendation.
Right.
Okay. By the way, Josh, here's that second one that came in, that they put the front of it as moderately susceptible to change, just to answer your question.
So,
Yes.
I guess for me, the Westminster School should not be, set up as education only. I think one of the issues we have in town is we set up properties as silos, and I think that setting up a true campus, whether it has elements of the public school system in there or not, can be figured out, but I think, educational, some retail, some office, some truly, mixed
and multiple
income.
use.
Mixed income, so like maybe a 50-50 affordable, and I live like 1 block away from here, so I'm perfectly happy with that being, near me.
Okay.
But I think that what that'll do is that'll take some of this property and funnel it back into the tax base.
Yep.
At the same time, even if there are educational components, those things could be carved out in, sustainable ways. you know, I'm not sure that ball fields are necessarily a great way to use property, and I also don't think siloing property just for one use is a good use for it.
Great comments.
Question.
Yes, sir.
What is the status of the Westminster Choir College right now?
Oh, I wish I knew. I understand that some family in town is thinking about buying it now. Seagulls are thinking about buying it. I mean, the rumors keep going around and round and round.
And that's not quite
Multiple
accurate.
lawsuits
What
involved
the
also.
story is going
It
to
would make
be.
a wonderful choir college.
Yeah. Fire college, yes.
That is one of their.
Yes.
Tony, you've been doing this for several times, but I wonder if there is a flow in your process. I can see on this map and the previous map that the zones that are red are either green areas or areas that we know are going to be redeveloped anyway because we know that there is turmoil around the choir college. I see this area, I think, next to the senior center. I'm worried. And then also, in the previous map, we had basically the sites of companies,
Right.
who are not part of this process.
Right.
So, can you explain to us what you think it's not a flow in the process?
So what happens here is that you typically ask people, and this typically for me is very, very early in the planning process. What are those areas that we should focus on that you think might change in the future? That's the question. Then once you get those particular pieces, you can have a greater tendency to focus when you actually come to the master plan to actually focus on those particular set of areas. For us, it was like, we didn't know. Honestly, we had no idea when we did this in May what would come out of it. We had no idea. We just asked people, what do you think areas that should be changed, or could change in the future? I was quite surprised at some of these areas. I mean, it is private property, but it also is zoned, which means at some point it can be rezoned. And also the question starts to be that if, let's say, for instance, these particular pieces that are, let's say, an office building, 1 story high with a big parking lot, those guys might say to themselves, listen, this has reached the end of its logical life cycle. We would love to go 2 stories. We'd love to build a parking deck here, and we'd love to have a garden, a meditation garden or something. So this just gives these people opportunity to be able to say, hey, listen, this is one of the sites that was looked at, and generally by the people. Now, the planners in town or the engineering department might ignore all this stuff, which I finally expect they will. But nonetheless, here is the areas that, the participatory democracy, people told us, here looks like places that might and could change. Now, in order to just to look at this, here's some of the things that people notated on the map for me. One was do the orange area in the front as a community center and public performance space and farmers market. Thought that was interesting.
Wow.
Improve bicycling and improve the park. Those are again, anytime there was a comment on those maps, I simply translated it, this is what I got so far. Now, obviously, if there's other things that we can add to this, the better. But, okay, this is, and of course, the walkway, pedestrian walkway needed as a connection through. But you notice they didn't make any recommendations for what to do along North Harrison Street, but they cited it as, hey, listen, we better look at this because I think at some point it actually may change. Now, let me move on to the next one. This is a really an interesting one as well. This is the Butler piece, and that's owned by the university. And I was really, again, I found it absolutely fascinating to find out what people really thought about this one. One, the entire track came up as highly susceptible to change, as we know. The question is who's going to do it? The university owns it. Does it become housing? What does it ever become? Does it stay as a park? Does it become a garden? Does the university build affordable housing on it? Mixed use or what have you? The next one was that entire back green space park came out as red. Again, it just, to me, I'm just simply the bearer of what people actually told us. But look at how it begins to fill in. I mean, this starts to be a huge collection, a huge.
Who owns the Butler track?
The university. The university does. So, when you start to look at this thing, here were the areas, and you can see there's a rather large area. My guess it begins to approach 50 acres of land or so of which a good percentage of, at least here, is essentially empty. Now, again, secondary possibilities came up as well. But the Butler tract is approximately 36 acres of land. The other pieces are 21 acres. You got a total of 70 acres there. That people thought, listen, this places are really highly susceptible to change in the future. Now, it was interesting that we did get some comments on this one as to what to begin to do with these properties. This one was interesting in the fact that they said, what we really need on here is experimental eco-housing, 36 acres, housing park, playground, neighborhood retail cafe, and a transit stop. It sounded like what Josh just said it, and what other folks have already mirrored.
That wasn't my comment from the sheet.
No, that wasn't your comment?
No, that's somebody else.
Whoever did the comment on this, the notion that, Josh, I'm just referring to the fact that development needs to be a mixed and multiple use facility. I thought this one was really a pretty interesting one. Little details, another community pool.
Can I just say, it looks like every piece of open green space has been targeted as possibly under change. It just says the whole, everywhere there's green space, people think it's under targeted.
Hey, this is what they told us. This is what they told us.
Tony, I just have a question. So this is, the question was, is it susceptible to change, right? Not, do you want it to change?
Yeah, is it susceptible to change?
I mean,
And susceptible to what?
I mean, a lot of people would say this is susceptible to change, we should protect it. Like,
Great.
for example, that space there next to, that's green space, that's where a lot of animals still live, and the university just changed that into playing fields. So,
Yeah,
it shouldn't necessarily be change development.
No,
Like,
no,
that should
no,
be
no, no,
protected.
no, no, absolutely not. I mean, I'm not saying, I'm not saying anything, I'm just telling you what they told us. And I'm asking you now, what do you think it should be? And you think it should be a
Green
park.
space.
Should
Well,
be green space.
Maybe not the Broadmead part, but the rest of it, absolutely.
But should be green space. That's a perfectly legitimate recommendation for this piece. So, I mean, those recommendations are things that we have to have some kind of understanding for. I mean, because sooner or later, we're gonna proceed on ahead with, you know, what should this be changed to? So I think that's number one, that's a great idea. Anything else?
Walnut.
Sure.
Go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say that, you know, you look at New York City, imagine New York City without Central Park, right? And so as we begin to think about areas that might become more dense, I think we have to be really intentional about carving out green space that we are planning to enhance, you know, all in various sort of distributed places around our town.
Mm-hmm.
I will say that the eco-housing is, I think, sort of harkens to, in this last session, and I don't know if other people saw the presentation that I worked on, but one of the things was as we identify areas that are susceptible to development, and then areas that we decide we want more density in, I think that those should actually have an overlay zone on them, an environmental overlay zone that requires, you know, projects to be electrified, projects to be net zero.
Sure.
And things like that, so that we are using our master planning and then the subsequent step, which is zoning, to really influence how those things get built.
Yeah.
Since there seems to be some interest in this topic, I just want to point out that on October 22nd, we will have another meeting like this where we talk about public lands and open space specifically.
Right. Now, remember, the red thing is susceptibility to change. It's not susceptibility to development. Susceptibility to change. Change to what? That's a question, and I think there seems to be a kind of a rising sympathy here, clearly for open space, to green space. to more green, and that's perfectly responsible. Carlos?
Just want to point out the obvious, Central Park is surrounded by high-rise housing. The Butler track is surrounded by single-family housing. Big difference.
Oh, yeah.
So I had a thought on the Butler tract. Tony, is Matt in the room?
No.
No,
Matt's last name, Matt Malechko, who has an exhibit at Dome Alley right now, talking about how the university possibly could turn this into a sort of a, I've forgotten what the title, the phrase of the land was, but a conservancy for housing. And he was thinking affordable housing could get in there, and he makes a really good argument. I read it and I thought, boy, that is a good argument. And then, in line with the previous comments here, I looked at that and I thought, you know, it could be housing, but this is now an open space of land. How many times do you get to play the open space of land card? I think just once. And so we've got it there. And I thought, what if we went to the university and said, hey, we'd like you to keep that open and work to make it more of either a wilderness preserve, which does not have playing fields in it, does not have a soccer field, but turns it back to the animals and wildlife and so on, and bears and plants and trees. And in return for that, we say to the university, we'll work with you to find places for those 200 units of housing that you want to stick in there, off of Nassau Street, behind Labyrinth Books, in close, where people could walk to your campus, as opposed to being on the other side of Harrison Street. So I've had a total change of mind on this piece of property since our last meeting, really. So I just want to put out a word, and the Central Park idea, good analogy. Now,
Can I?
Sorry,
Just
Carlos.
point out again the obvious. I'm not familiar with many nature preserves that have public water and public sewer, which this track has. I mean, if you want to create a nature reserve, do it in the right place.
Jimmy, if you notice the tract right below it happens to be owned also by the university, and it's also university housing. And you see how there's wavy streets and there are houses on the perimeter, and then there's this green space in between. And I have been there multiple times, and that green space in between is completely inaccessible. It is green space, and it is for the animals, but it has no way for people to access it. So that's one way to learn that they have set a certain portion of the land in preservation, but it has very minimal usefulness. So when the planning for the new site, trying to reverse it or trying to allow access, because there's a good lesson right here, that there's a big portion already set as green space, but it's not Central Park. It basically has everybody's backyard fences facing a green space that has no way of accessing it. So if there's a way to take that, you know, there's housing on the perimeter and green space in the middle, is it reversed? Is there green space that's actually accessible to other people? Maybe the houses are in the middle, the green space is on the outside, or or pass through, where you don't just sort of fence off a green space that, you know, squirrels are enjoying and nobody else is.
Well, it reminds me, it reminds me, I'll come to you. It reminds
It's
me.
not on the edge of the water, there's still way down to the water.
By the way, it reminds me of Redburn. I mean, do you all know Redburn?
What?
Redburn. Redburn is the classic American housing development built in 1929 by Clarence Stein in Redburn, New Jersey, that has this collective open space in the middle of which all houses have access to it. Kids can go to school without ever having to cross the road. You can walk to the downtown through a park, and every house has access to the green space in the middle. I mean, it's a classic American planning concept.
Except
Sounds
this one
exactly what you're
doesn't.
talking
Right,
about.
but this one doesn't.
No,
People
this
don't
one
have
isn't.
access
No,
to
no,
So it's
no.
also
I agree,
like,
Heidi.
sort of like Governor's Lane too, right?
Yeah, I mean, it would be kind of interesting. I mean, it's an interesting concept, but, yes.
Marina, I'll show you access to that. There is public access. I used to, when I
But
would walk
nobody
better,
knows
I
where
would
it
cut
is.
through there all the time. I'll show you. There are several access points.
But do people actually use it?
I do see people occasionally walking there. There's actually a bench sitting back there as well. There
not-
is. I think it's
Dan,
all
you're
owned by the
leading a
university.
walk. We
I-
do,
I will-
that's it. We're doing walks
I
over
will,
there.
I'll take you through there at some point. This is my neighborhood, my neighborhood within our broader neighborhood. I agree with Matt, that I think that that is a prime area for development, referring back to the point that there is infrastructure there, right? There's electric, there's a sewer and all that. I do think, however, we can consider a greater density, and I would like to see mixed, again, I don't want to create ghettos anywhere. I want to, gated communities or ghettos. I like to think about economic integration. But I think that there's scope for us to build, as opposed to the army barracks that were once there, these one-story buildings, that you build something with 2, 3 floors, and then you can still preserve all the space. I think Le Corbusier talked about vertical cities to preserve all this. We can take some aspect of that just to build a little, much more density, but something that is not, that runs in contrast with the rest of the community. It's all walking distance. I cut through it on my bike here today. It's all walking distance to public schools, to the Princeton Shopping Center, to downtown, to Labyrinth Books, all of that. I think it's a great place for developed housing.
Okay.
One more comment back here.
Sure.
You.
Yes.
Oh, in terms of experimental eco-housing, since it's a blank slate, and it's pretty likely housing is going to appear there, it's my guess. You could do things like geothermal, you could require heat pumps, you could restrict the number of parking spaces, and that would be eco right
Well,
there.
that's pretty much what Heidi was talking about, the whole net zero concept. And of course, we're not really sure about what's going to happen with climate change, what's happening. All of that is really variable at this point. But it appears that with the direction that the town seems to want to go, and certainly the university has gone, is make it more walkable, make it more transit friendly, and make it less car centric.
Yeah, less vehicles.
And more green. Those are kind of the things that I get. Okay, we got a couple more really.
I'm sorry, where was that? What
Oh,
neighborhood?
what was this? This is the Butler track.
Riverside?
This is the Butler
Can
track.
you orient Harrison Street on that?
Okay,
for
here you
people?
go. I'll go back to the street name. So,
I have one other.
South Harrison Street, see it?
Yep.
Hartley, Western
Hartley
Way.
is Faculty Road, effectively.
Yeah, and if you, way up above is Nassau Street. Okay? Josh?
Just one other thing, I'm not 100% sure on this, so if I'm wrong, I apologize, but I'm pretty sure Riverside is the only neighborhood in Princeton that hasn't been assigned an affordable overlay. So following up on that previous comment, I think that would be an interesting.
The Jewish
Good
Center
comment.
is
You're not
Riverside.
Riverside.
Yes,
It's
ma'am.
not Riverside?
No, okay.
Regarding the Riverside, I just spoke to Eve Niedergang yesterday, and she said Butler, who I guess is a developer, was in talks with the town to develop this textile company that's there off of Prospect, TCI or something, I forget their name.
Textile.
They've been empty for years, right? So she said they were gonna do it and then they backed out, but it might happen soon and they need more affordable housing, so that's gonna be, development.
Who said that?
But Eve Niedergang, she's a council member.
Oh,
And she said that they are required by the state to put up more affordable housing, so they have to find more open land for that.
Yeah,
And that's next.
And I believe that they haven't met their first obligation, and the second obligation is about to come down.
Right, they have to
Fairly
do all
soon.
this by 2025.
I mean, so all of a sudden, the town is gonna be stuck again. And, according to some of the research that was done by somebody in this room, the town spent $1.5 million fighting it and finally lost. I mean, sooner or later, they're gonna accept it, they're going to have to, but I think this whole combination of things of the land use, the transportation, the open space system, the school, the expansion of the university, all are part of an extraordinarily complex and interesting master plan that has to be explored in the future. Okay, let's move on to and again, I took these in what I thought were the simplest orders to the more complex orders. You can recognize this one as we're gonna go down it. This is the Witherspoon Street, the Avalon Apartments, the pool, the municipal building is down way on the right-hand side, John Street, and this one too turned out to be extremely, to me, just extremely interesting. So here's what people told us. They said, again, you're gonna see most of Witherspoon Street has gone, serious changes needed and necessary. This is the Clay Street apartments. Lots of feeling that those apartments need to change in some form or another. The extension of Witherspoon Street, and then you come down to the Franklin Avenue site, which we know has been in litigation. My gosh, there's been heaven knows how many really beautiful plans were done for that. That's in the process, some form or another. So that's a given. And then you get some of the other pieces, including the parking lot, the municipal parking lot in back of the pool area, which came up as part of it. This little piece up here is the municipal storage area, which when we did the plan for the Witherspoon Jackson area, people want to see definitely changed. So this one may be a bit clearer, but then some of these moderately susceptible to change thing came to some of the open spaces. The existing parking deck by Avalon Apartment came up high, and then some of the other little pockets of development came up fairly moderately susceptible to change over a particular period of time. So you can see that literally almost all of Witherspoon Street, with the exception of the frontage along Avalon, has come up for some level of potential change in the future. What that is, again, we're not, absolutely not sure. The comments, of course, as you said, as we said, the lot for the municipal storage area, which could be moved on the River Road, that becomes highly susceptible. The parking lot for the city hall becomes highly susceptible. So this is what people have told us. And then the other thing that came up fairly high was that there needs to be what they call the northern gateway. Somehow or another that impacts the Valley Road School, the old Valley Road School site, in terms of what should happen with that. But also the whole notion that Witherspoon Street becomes some kind of a green street, a kind of a main green spine that goes through the town. And as you know, they're doing the top end of it as a kind of a plaza area now. So the question really starts to become, what's the future of Witherspoon Street? Now, the town is doing its first piece of it, right? I think it's from Nassau Street down to Green. And then the expectation next is to Green all the way down the valley. So this is not a surprise at all to see so much red here. Is there any other pieces that you think should be here? Because when we actually looked at it, you can see a lot little small areas, but you got fairly large chunks of land that could actually be developed in some form or another. Now, it was interesting to see what people actually recommended for these particular areas. We didn't get a lot of
Can
it.
I just ask you a quick question?
Sure, of course.
Isn't that thing coming down already spoken for? Where's
Yes.
the 450 unit
Valley,
multi
this one here?
is all spoken for, right? That's
That
gonna
one
be
is-
450 homes.
No,
right?
No, 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 no.
No?
No, I think it's 150.
It's required to be 80,
It's
and there's
160.
discussions to do it as 160.
160,
But there's no
so
more than
you're
that.
3 times over what's going to be there.
And the
No.
chances of that happening are pretty low.
It's lower by the day.
Lower by the day.
What's low? The
Chances of it happening
Oh.
in time for 2025.
They're supposed to have a commitment to it, I think, according to the agreement, by like January or something like
Yes.
that. I don't see that.
Yeah, the question, that has been sitting in limbo now for lots of months, and I understand that from some people on the board that the issue of financing is really the big issue here, because the town really would like it to go 50-50. It means 50% affordable, 50% market, so that the market rate would pay for part of it. The typical rule out there is anywhere between 15 and 20%. The big project that I'm working on now in Jersey City, for a 100-acre piece there, it's going to go 30%. Here, town wants 50%. So it's a really touchy issue, but the wonderful thing about it is that it would mix market rate housing with low and moderate income housing in the same track. But yeah, that is in the process of who knows what. Yes.
Just as a comment, 50% affordable is very, very expensive for the town, and we're gonna have to pay a lot more taxes for it. Because, I mean, they're already building a senior housing right on Thanet, and that's 100% affordable, that building. 80 units or more, I don't know. And
160.
That's our tax money that's
Except-
paying for it.
Yeah, between 50 and 100%, there are grants from the state that will cover that.
Cover that.
And so that's why you don't wanna go more than 50%, you know, that's why you wanna go at least 50%. If you went 100%, there are grants from the state. The problem is that you're rolling the dice, you may or may not get those grants.
Of course.
And there's no, you know, so
You
at
have
least
to
if you
assume that
include,
you're not.
if you include the market rate in the mix,
Yeah.
you're basically allowing the developer to finance and balance off some of the costs so the town doesn't have to pay as much.
I mean, that seems to be the more logical thing. And however, people are going to do that. There are certain housing on that site right now which are in really, really not great condition. And that needs to be, those need to be redeveloped in some form or another. And that's that little kind of a triangular piece at the top end of the Franklin Avenue project. But yeah, it's really interesting that the Clay area one, this one, and then the senior citizen housing that's down down near the shopping center, that one also came up as an area that needs to be worked on, because it's just old. It's old and it's worn out. But what is interesting, I think people pointed out, is that the town is going to get another obligation in another 2 years. And so that needs to be done. And you saw the statistics. I mean, you've got a high percentage of people in town, quite surprisingly, who are below the poverty line. I mean, and those are the people, quite honestly, that people are really worried about. But on the other hand, firemen, school teachers, people like that, they can't afford to pay $125,000, $1,250,000 for a house. That's an issue. So it's sticky, and these sites have got to be looked at as a possibility of being able to do that. That's all we're saying is they're going to change down, especially, you know, what the Franklin Avenue site is literally a parking lot, storage area for downtown. Yes,
What is that lower left section?
the orange one,
Yeah.
that is the area,
Yeah.
that is the area that you have, it's the only I can say, in order for me to get into the cemetery, I have to go
Yeah,
here
that's
and
where I
go
live,
into the
I'm
cemetery at that point. That little neighborhood came up as orange, quite surprisingly. Also, I was quite surprised that the ball field here came up as orange.
Yeah.
The parking deck came up as orange. And the intersection of John and Lil came up as orange.
Well,
But
that makes sense.
That's, is what it is. Okay, now we're gonna get to I think is, some of the observations that were made straight on the maps at that point. Mixed-use parking structure, that seems to be pretty obvious of it. Community center came up as a possibility. Now, this starts to get, I'm sorry, of course.
Like one question, why, I know it's nice to have affordable housing in the core, but
Yes.
considering these are especially bad areas, also a sensitive area to developing, why isn't there a push, like in this huge area out there where there's single family housing, to put affordable housing there and improve transit to that? I just think that
Well,
would.
the town is actually putting an overlay, I think it's gonna come up in the next month or two. They're gonna be putting an overlay down Witherspoon Street. I think it goes from Paul Robeson, I'm not sure where it ends here.
Yeah, yeah.
Somewhere just past Avalon.
Yeah, green all the way down to Valley, I believe. Yeah,
Can I?
sure.
Yeah, so, one thing about the development of Witherspoon Street, right, the real estate of the public way is limited, the width of it.
Mhm.
And, you know, just having the word green there, the first thing I think of is, wow, wouldn't it be nice to have a tree-lined street? But with the power lines that run up and down Witherspoon, you're really, there's all this competition for the space, right? It's the power lines, the trees, the parking, the cars, you know, all of that. And, you know, I know we've been told over and over again that it's too expensive to put the power lines underground. But I really wish we were, you know, really working harder and to try and figure that out, because, if this is gonna be this, you know, really important spine with a northern gateway, I have to say, those power lines are not the most attractive. The other thing,
I agree.
the other thing I wanted to say about, the overlay is that it's really complex. At least I read the first draft of that overlay zone. I don't think it was very thoughtfully developed, to tell you the truth. With the Witherspoon neighborhood becoming a historic district, there's just a lot to think about there.
It's been revised.
Well, okay, that's not the way it sort of read to me in that zoning. And I also have to say that for the portion that fronts the public school, I think that needs to be really well thought out, and I don't think it is in that overlay zone, because you have a lot of kids walking there and a lot of traffic, and so there really needs to be thought about safety for the school kids. And whenever we put something up that's more dense, we need to think about what's adjacent to it. And I'll honestly put it out there, you know, my house backs right up to it, and if a 5-story single mass element goes up along Witherspoon Street, it's gonna like tower over my backyard. And so the important thing for me that I wanna say about all of this, and I went through a whole a series of models of what those words look like. And I know the town always says, well, this is the maximum that can be built. I'm gonna tell you, if the words say the maximum, that's what's gonna end up being built. So it's super important, and this was another thing that I put into my presentation from last time, is that for the areas that we are designating through the master planning process, that we want them to become more dense, and I'm not opposed to the density and the mixed use or anything like that, I'm for it. Those things need to be modeled in 3 dimensions,
Yes.
like in SketchUp or something like that, so that the town understands visually, not in words, because the words are not enough, to help us understand what it is we want there and how it integrates into the town sort of more organically.
Well
And you
said.
don't get, you know, the spaceship of Avalon Bay landing
Right.
along that Witherspoon Street.
Tanya, I believe they took a lot of your changes and incorporated them in.
Oh,
Well, just as an aside, on several comments with me, most of you don't know, I live on Bank Street, my wife and I live on Bank Street. We own 2 houses on Bank Street, we are directly behind the construction of the
yeah,
hotel.
oh my God,
It was gonna be a 6-story building on our property line,
yeah.
and there's really nothing I could do about it. I also was very active in trying to get Bank Street to have historic lights and to put the lighting, the wiring on the ground. Yeah, we could do that, but in order to do that, each of us homeowners had to pay
Yeah.
$70,000. I would have to put up $140,000 to have the wiring put down for a 100-foot section of Bank Street.
That's crazy.
I mean, it's just crazy. So what happens is they're still up there.
It's a
But look
million
at what they
watt.
did to the
Sure,
trees.
of course.
Just a comment about the Northern Gateway.
Yes.
I mean, we look at 206 as this barrier, so there's all this pressure right here. I mean, if it was easy to cross 206, maybe a pedestrian bridge or something where Unitarian churches, you could put a 3-story building there that wouldn't overshadow the local
Yeah.
housing. And I think that maybe
Interesting.
we should stop thinking about these Avalon bays and affordable housing and all the pressure coming, and put it in areas where you won't even notice it. And there's an open field there.
Right.
It's in walking distance. We wanted to buy there, but literally we didn't want our kid to cross 206. There
Got
was
it.
no bike path. But if that gateway connects that open space, it can take a lot of pressure off this region.
Interesting idea.
And then it could really be a gateway instead of a gas station.
Yeah. That's a big- Okay, now, we got 3 of them left to go. This is downtown. And you can see it, you can see Wiggins, Witherspoon Street, Nassau, the University. This is Chambers Street, I live right there. This is the parking deck. This is the townhouse, this is Paul Robeson Place. This one also turned out to be, I think, extremely interesting. So I'm going to break this down into little pieces, the best I can describe it. This little piece is on Chambers Street. It's Princeton's longest driveway. So that if you are walking down there, it's blocked off. So you can't walk down that street because somebody has a driveway on it. But anyway, then all of the little areas, this is the area behind Dome Alley, that little parking lot, that came up as a high possibility. Then, this one, I think Josh has got a wonderful design for this. This is the piece right across from the library, the little parking lot in the middle of downtown, which is probably, came up as high. Then a little bit along Wiggins at this point, where the power station is and some of the housing along the side came up as fairly high. Some of the stuff on the back of Tulane came up fairly high. Park Place, all of the parking area in back of Park Place came up as fairly high. Then you had the area that's in back of Bank Street. That is a big area
Would you
back
point
there.
to these places as you call them out?
Oh, sure, okay. This, I'm talking about this piece now. Here's Bank Street, Nassau Street, and there's a big open area back here. Used to have a parking lot. It's a big surface parking lot. This is the hotel site. That's under construction now. That's the big driveway, whatever it is. This is the parking area across from the library. This is, again, part of the Witherspoon Street. This is the power station or whatever it is along its frontage. There's some housing on Tulane Street. This is the area in back of Dome Alley off of Witherspoon Street. And this is the Park Place. It was interesting that this was done so meticulously that they really chose individual, very clear individual pieces to be included. Now, you can see, again, both sides. If I would say, if there's two corridors that came up really high in this one, one was the Harrison Street corridor from one end to the other, literally, and the other one is Witherspoon Street. These two seem to be the one where people are really focusing on the most. And then there was odds and ends, other one, the existing old City Hall area came up as a possibility. The Y lot, that's a big parking lot, came up as a secondary possibility. The Chambers Street parking deck came up as a possibility. And then we got some little one-story buildings along Witherspoon Street. Little one-story buildings also came up as a possibility. So those are, then there was, in addition to these individual pieces, of which, this one is under construction, this one is being proposed, this one is absolutely wide open, this one is wide open, and there's some action happening here at this point, and then we have no idea what is going on here, but clearly the town is doing the piece of down to Spring Street. This piece is going to be done. This is the next phase of it, and then from Paul Robeson all the way down the valley, supposedly, is the next phase that the town is going to be doing with, I guess, with Earl Asphalt. But then,
Can I just ask, when you're gonna publish this, right?
I don't know what we're going to do with it yet, quite honestly. We're not quite sure what to do with it.
Well, I would just suggest that if you do, can you put the street names on?
Oh, yeah,
Thanks.
it's
very.
it's on this one.
The fact that you can't see them, the
Okay,
street
I got
names and the
Sure.
sites at the same
Okay,
time.
I could do that. That's easy
Okay,
enough. That's
thanks.
easy enough.
What's the blue block in the cemetery?
Oh, again, that's always
This is
by,
scale.
that's my graphic scale. That's what I did to measure things.
Oh.
That's just a graphic scale.
That's
Now,
insane.
they also, a couple of things also came up. Bike paths, and I thought your suggestion was really an interesting one about, the sidewalks being dual use. But here's something that happened which I thought was really, really interesting. An overlay across the entire downtown that moves it from a floor area ratio, which is, what you can build, I believe 1.5, to a minimum of 3.0. Minimum of 3.0. That came up as a possibility, yes.
Yeah, so our office did an analysis of the central business district,
Uh-huh.
and the existing average of FAR in the central business district is 3.
What's the
right
FAR?
now, you can legally build a parking deck at an FAR of 3,
Right.
but your maximum usage for a regular property is 1.5.
1.5.
We should explain FAR.
Yeah.
So that's floor area ratio. It's the comparison of the size of the lot versus the size of the building.
Right. Anyway,
So you say it's all overbuilt?
it's an overlay.
No, actually, because it was historically, bigger and denser, when they put the zoning in place, they underzoned it. And so instead of accepting the scale of
Of what's
the-
there?
what's there, they basically underzoned it.
Right. So again, that recommendation was a minimum of 3.0, which is, I thought was a very clear observation. And the area, using that little blue square, is approximately 104 acres of land. But then you can see all the little pieces within it that people suggested that change occur, and other places where, they simply have said, leave it alone, which I thought was really, really pretty interesting. Now, the general recommendation says, here, again, these are little notes that were put on the drawings that we translated. Public theater and performance space, more bike racks, increased interior pedestrian walkway, and a cannabis dispensary is what I got on the maps. Be that as it may. And then, again, the safe bike routes, that is a kind of a reoccurring theme that definitely has to happen in the context of transportation. As you saw before, safe bike paths, people are really looking for that thing. And then they're also looking for some things that traffic calming. I thought that was a really interesting comment, to be able to talk about how cars are really speeding along there, some kind of a traffic calming device. So, thoughts on this one? This is probably the single most important of all of the pieces, but notice it's little bits and pieces. It's not the entire downtown, but it still allows that 3.0 recommended minimum, and that might be a suggestion, is that if that's the minimum, should there be a maximum?
That seems to be a very specific comment that somebody made. Seems like a developer, I think
What?
there needs to be more, if they are going to, there needs to be an explanation of what that means. That's
It was my comment. I put that comment on.
I just think
There
that
was,
needs to be.
it also happened in other ones
Yeah.
as well.
Sorry.
Yeah, I was quite surprised.
But I think that's very technical. I'd like to get a sense of why you think that's good. Like it may have been underzoned, but the development was done subject to that. Like if you remove that, what does that mean? Like suddenly you get twice as many stores. That's going to be a huge impact on traffic flow.
No, it's actually, honestly, the intent is exact opposite, actually. It would allow, if you allowed for a greater FAR and geared it towards, mixed income development. So then you would get affordable housing downtown, you would get market rate housing downtown. You get people who wouldn't need the car because they'd be able to walk to everything they needed.
That's right.
Okay?
Well,
that's the goal of, that's,
I understand, but I think that's something that needs to be very careful. Like for example, there's
yeah.
this idea that we're going to build parking with reduced parking.
So,
And the first thing that happened is they built buildings and then people need parking and then now.
so,
it's just-
to be clear,
it's a big
something like
problem.
that, okay, needs a lot of work, okay? And we have a history of creating zoning and not doing it right. Just look at, everyone's talking about Avalon, right? The zoning that was created for that was the previous developer, and in it, it said the uses that are allowed are, residential, retail, office, but it didn't say, and the intent was, and the people who worked on that, the intent was that it was a mixed use, right? That it was going to be required. But nowhere in there did it say all uses need to be used on this property. And as a result, we got a silo, again, of housing on the property that doesn't use all those uses.
Right, so
And
what
so,
I'm saying is. when you
crafting
make-
zoning is critical.
Yes, but I'm saying, when you say FAR free, there needs to be a lot more behind that.
Oh, of
FAR
course.
free with all that, that's all I'm saying.
I've lived in that, I'm in this map, and we're sitting, in fact, in the church, which is right on the edge of that Park Place parking lot. And our neighborhood is in favor of the redevelopment of the Park Place parking lot and fronting it with dense housing. We would definitely want at least 3.0 FAR. We would be very unhappy with one house on a large lot in that prime space. And before, you know, we're talking about having to push people out across Route 206 to put a housing up and then a pedestrian bridge. Well, before you do that, please join our Park Place Athletic Club or Neighborhood Association and help us lobby to get Park Place parking lot put to better use. Before you do the, you know, the pedestrian bridge across Route 206.
No, I agree, but I just
Yeah,
say
help
like
us.
just a blanket thing of doubling floor area is
Well,
not a good idea.
well, let me
yeah.
go back to
Should
the,
be more.
let me go back to the hotel. The hotel, to get approval to the zoning board, took 6 months testimony, maybe longer. And it was in the process, longer than that, maybe a year before the zoning board. God knows what it cost those folks in terms of legal fees, what it cost us in terms of time and energy. But a huge amount of stuff went on there, and the fundamental argument there was floor area ratio and height. I mean, and, you know, it was pretty clear that they could not make that project go with the floor area ratio of 1.5. They couldn't. And put the parking underground? They couldn't. I mean, so there's a kind of a developer reality that has to kind of apply here. But just looking at the pieces here, would you, I mean, there's so many, and I think people were really astute about this, to say that if these pieces that are in red and then in orange got developed at a floor area ratio of 3, my guess is that it probably would barely make a feasible argument, especially if you include affordable housing in it. It just, there's a developer reality here that has to be done, but also, I mean, you know, and I don't want to personally put my own thing in, but I will at this point. What we need is, you know, who does the dishes and serves the food and cuts the grass. These are people who can't afford to live in town. School teachers can't afford to live in town. I mean, it's getting to a point where somebody said this is a kind of a golden nest. I mean, to the point where we've got to responsibly start to think about this. My kids can't afford to live in this town. I mean, I can't. So, I mean, it's something we have to tackle with, and I think the key factor here in many of these cases, because traffic is going to be an issue, parking is going to be an issue, I think a big part of this thing is obviously transportation, movement, pedestrian movement, vehicular movement, and then the dinky and what happens to that. All of that needs to be decided, and it can't continue to be delayed. It needs to happen now because things are moving extraordinarily fast with inflation, climate change, and, you know, we can't lollygag around in this one, I don't think. Yes?
Traffic calming. I live on Wigan Street.
Uh-huh.
We might take a cue from New York City. How about when you get home after going 45 miles an hour down Wigan Street, you're emailed a $150 ticket. That might calm you down next time you go through.
I mean, you know, listen, I was touring Europe, was a year ago. I was in Holland. I got 4 speeding tickets. One of them was for 1 kilometer over the speed limit, and it cost me $120. 1 kilometer over the speed limit. Yeah, no, I mean, I thought, cool, you know, now I go to Holland, man, I religiously follow the speed limits, which I think is a great thing.
And the town coffers would benefit.
Yeah, say that again.
I'm puzzled by something you said a moment ago about how if people were living downtown, they wouldn't need cars because they can walk to everything they need.
Yes.
I'm hard pressed to understand how you're going to get everything you need walking around downtown Princeton.
Oh, well, let me give you a perspective.
Unless you can afford to shop at the fine delicatessens, the people who need affordable housing have to be able to get to a cheap supermarket.
Exactly.
They don't have one of those.
Yeah, and
Well,
in order to do
That's
that.
not cheap.
But it's not cheap.
Right,
You can walk.
I mean, it is too much of a walking distance with a lot of shopping bags to walk all the way from downtown to the nearest supermarket.
To the
reality,
cafes,
you know?
The reality is.
No, I agree. But now if
But
one
people
had
are-
a transit, again, we need to look at this whole idea of transit as being a possible access. And certainly that shopping center, even with the stuff that you've seen so far from New Jersey Transit, terminates its transit system that goes all the way from the junction to McCaffrey's. The question is whether or not that's appropriate or not, or if that's the correct route or not, that all needs to be decided. And again, that needs to be decided fairly soon. But what would happen is in some cases, again, I'll just take an example. I used to live in Montgomery, had a big house, sold it, now live downtown in a little house on Bank Street. And literally, and last week, just some of you know, don't know, I gave my second car away. I donated it for Cars for Kids. So I finally said, listen, it's time to give up the second car. And forced myself to walk and take a bicycle. Now, Francoise, we were out of something, I don't know what it was. She walked to McCaffrey and was back before I got up this morning. I mean,
That's a good 20-minute walk.
I agree, not a problem. She doesn't seem to do, she actually tried to walk to Hopewell the other day, so my wife is a little walker.
So three quick things. So first, you know, people are doing it now, you know, as was just said, you know, I see people, you know, I basically drive on Franklin every day, that's my commute, okay? And I shouldn't drive, so but that's a whole other thing. But I see people coming from McCaffrey's to the Whisper and Jackson neighborhood with groceries on a daily basis, with laundry on a daily basis. They're on their bikes, they're walking.
That's right.
Okay, it exists, it happens now. You know, it's the world we live in, but it is possible to live entirely in our town. That's the first thing. Second thing is, I think if you look at communities as far as traffic calming, like Syracuse, New York, so about 5, maybe 8 years ago, they implemented a lot of these bike routes, and they shrunk the size of their streets, okay? They planted trees between their bike lane and the street, and, you know, so they did it primarily for the safety of the bikers, but what they also noticed is the speed of the traffic dropped by about 10 miles an hour.
Yeah.
Okay, the street got narrower, all of a sudden cars were driving slower.
Yeah.
And the last thing I just want to say is, you know, identifying areas that are susceptible to change, right? We live in the world that we live in, and the places that you don't expect to change will change. So like on this map, you know, the Momos are submitting a very interesting development on the corner right there, and so that's a spot that's not even identified that's going.
Yes, it is. It's that red spot.
No, it's not. The red spot is the,
It's right above it.
Oh, okay.
that's
okay.
Greek's Corner is what's identified. It's the other one, other corner of the site.
Right. I mean, again, that overlay district is gonna be important, and also, you know, I'm really curious to find out what the master plan is gonna actually say about it, because your comments this
Yeah, I
morning
just wanted to
are
make
really
one
right
other
on.
comment.
Sure.
You know, one of the reasons my husband and I moved to Princeton, because it was like the biggest small town in the area, and he came from Santiago, Chile, which was millions of people. And so he was a little freaked out about living in this area where everything was so small. But we also really were intentional about where we bought our house, because we wanted our kids to be able to walk to school, we wanted them to be able to get to the library and all these things. We didn't want to have to get in a car for absolutely everything. Well, as it turns out that this was a really good move, because my husband has had Parkinson's for over 20 years, and he's now in a wheelchair. And he has a power wheelchair, and thank God we live where we do, because he can drive himself into town and get bread and go to the library and get to the pharmacy and go to the shopping center. And if we didn't have that, he would be trapped in our house while I go to work every day. So the other thing that I just want us to think about is universal design in everything we do and everything we plan, and accessibility. There are many places in town are really difficult for him to navigate. And every time you have sidewalks that are too narrow, up and down Witherspoon Street, and for two people to walk abreast or somebody to pass you while you're coming up, it's really important for us to think about making if we're working on changes, everything we do should really incorporate that.
And it seems to be that whatever the master plan is in the final zoning, the street sections start to become really critical. I sometimes have told my students the reason why Nassau Street is so successful is that it's 18 feet wide. And it has turned out to be the blessing for this town. because that's where all the cafes are, that's where the people are, that's where you can walk 3 or 4 abreast of each other. I mean, it really is an extraordinary thing that happened just by happenstance. But in looking at the historic photographs, it always was that way. And the idea of wider sidewalks is really, really critical, there's no doubt. Especially in this transportation mode, if we're gonna be talking about more pedestrians in the future, that's.
Gotta have space for 'em.
That's gonna be, clearly,
Can I
yes.
try to be very quickly here, Tony. We create the change that we want. That we do not have supermarkets in the town center. Once upon a time, what the CVS was an A&P, I believe.
Yes.
There are supermarkets. We can drive supermarkets there. I recall as a kid, we talked about the phenomenon, oh, that's a 2-car family. Most people had 1 car.
Right.
Were 1-car families. And in a generation, it's 2 cars, 3 cars, 4 cars, 5 cars.
Right.
We now shop at Sam's Club. We bring big bulk. We need storage space for it. You know, we can buy in smaller increments.
Right.
And we will drive that behavior by fostering a community that has more diversity in terms of the real estate and the retail
Right.
As well. I just want to emphasize a point that has been made by this woman, by the gentleman over there, has been made several times, the importance of the safe bike paths. And what we see in other parts of the world, I know in Netherlands, you go to Copenhagen, there is a marked difference in height between the sidewalk, between the street, between the bike path, and then between the sidewalk. They're narrow, but they work. I think we need to consider something like that here, because the bike boulevards, a lot of automobilists just don't recognize them and don't respect them. And I think we ought to think about physical manifestation of how to.
One last thing, I just note that overseas cemeteries are not off limits. Many cemeteries have very nice bike paths running through them.
yeah.
Obviously down Witherspoon. I don't know who owns the cemetery, I don't know whether
That
there are
one?
any problems doing that. But that's actually a nice place to walk, and I always thought that that part of Witherspoon, a lot of the pressure could be taken off. Either was a path going through the cemetery or
Yes.
going in.
Well, that was thought about in a lot of seriousness when the Franklin Avenue
Yeah.
project was being done to run paths through the cemeteries. It's been talked about by so many people. Interesting that when I worked on the Witherspoon Jackson, you probably all know it, there's a colored entrance to the cemetery which is locked, which is gated. But it used to be the colored entrance because, you know, at those days that was the case. But right now, to get into the cemetery, you gotta
all the way
you gotta go all the way around. You can't get into it. And it would make an absolutely lovely walking path through. I mean, there's so much history there. It seems to be. Okay, we gotta move on. And great comments, by the way. Okay, the next piece of it is they call the Jugtown area. And just to give you some names here, and Heidi, I will put them on the other one. You got Nassau Street, Chestnut Street, and you say North Harrison Street, all the way down here at the other side. Again, and above Hamilton, you're gonna see the beginnings of the Choir College. Again, things that kind of overlapped each other. So, fascinating here. The cemetery in back of St. Paul's Church came up high. Some individual building lots came up high. Some of the areas along Nassau Street, as you can see, it almost kind of marches down anytime there's actually mixed use. And then the whole area of the Jugtown area, including the existing fire station, that whole area back there came up high. Then it continued across the street. It's interesting there because they just put a serious renovation into those particular sets of buildings. So these were the areas that most people thought should be developed in some form or another. And again, it is a bit spotty, but you can see where it turns into a commercial here at the bottom. This is where most people thought there should be some potential change in the future. And again, it's not a whole lot, but it is spotty in terms of its overall pieces of it. And it was interesting that there wasn't one recommendation that came out of any of this. Usually there were
recommendations on the spot for these areas. But on this one, I got no write-ins on what should happen in these particular areas. So I'm gonna look to you guys to say, hey, listen, what do you think should begin to happen in here? Starting probably with this one, we know that the fire station is there. That's pretty much going to be abandoned, or it will be abandoned. And then you've got all of this complex here, of which many of us shop. So, any thoughts on this one? Yes?
When you say it comes up high, high in what?
High susceptibility to change.
High in susceptibility to
rated
change.
that-
That's not mandated change.
No,
Look at a little
no,
orange
no,
block
no,
there.
no,
Why
no,
is
no.
that slated for change?
No.
Just
Look at that now.
potential for change.
No, it's just there's potential for
The
change.
little corner, the one corner one?
Yeah, people,
It's just
That's
like-
in Michael Graves' office, I'm guessing that.
yeah,
I know the
Graves,
neighborhood I live in.
really, Michael Graves' office came up, got a big parking lot around it. I mean, again, this is not us doing it, it's not us recommending development, it's just saying, what did you think possible change could happen? Yes?
Okay, my roots go back 6 generations in Jugtown, and I worked on that corner for 25 years.
Uh-huh.
So I have a little insight on what could happen. There's only, I believe, the town, Princeton Properties, the bank. There's no more than 3 or 4 property owners in that 7-acre section, I believe.
Right, I think you're right.
The whole parcel should be somehow put together, unified, and changed drastically.
Okay?
I mean,
And that pretty much says it based on the piece that's there. Yeah, interesting
particularly the
suggestion.
bank property.
Yeah, it's
For
just-
example, the bank parking lot,
Right.
no one uses the bank parking lot except the bank's staff.
Right,
And an occasional person who drives in, parks, and goes in.
right,
Occasional, I mean,
I mean-
it's just totally underutilized.
yes.
I think it's just a very bizarre, poorly functioning.
Area.
The parking lots are not contiguous. Getting in and out, you
It's
basically
difficult.
end up in the front room of a podiatrist.
Yeah, the whole area is obsolete. It's
Okay.
it's amazing that the whole earth is able to function.
Yeah.
Okay, now, I'm gonna move on to the last one. This one, again, surprised me no end. This one is the one down Alexander Street, across from the train station. You see the dinky line, lots of parking lots, lots of office buildings of various kinds of uses. But this one really did surprise me. The recommendation is you take 220 feet along the entire edge of the golf course and convert it to something. I mean, obviously, it would be a phenomenal, anything.
What about the golf course?
And then the opposite side came up equally as a high opportunity area, which I thought was really also really interesting. And then some of the other areas that came up high was that entire big parking lot. I mean, this whole idea that parking lots are kind of the land banks for the future, it starts to become pretty critical here. And then, the other question is the future of the dinky line. And, there's lots of controversy about that one. And I think sooner or later, the town's gonna have to start to get off and start to make a decision one way or the other on that one. But I thought this one was extraordinarily interesting. And I thought it was very perceptive, actually. Now, they also want a bike lane along that one. And when you look at the acreages, the one on the university property, essentially the golf course, is approximately 26 acres of land, and the opposite side is approximately 18 acres of land. Now, there was very few recommendations for this one as well. I mean, people just looked at it and said, hey, this is all highly susceptible to change. They only made a couple of recommendations. They want a pedestrian-friendly edge. Because, a lot of us come and go up and down that street, and on one side it's probably okay, the other one, it's not okay. I mean, it's not easy or fun or interesting to walk on it. But I also thought that huge, big parking lot has an opportunity there, which is.
Can I make one comment about that
Oh, but
parking
of
lot?
course.
I commuted to New York for 10 years. I waited 7 years to get a parking spot at Alexander.
Yes,
That parking lot is not visible now, but it's critical to commuters to New York from Princeton, because you get in a very long line at West Windsor. You have to drive across Route 1, which is a nightmare.
Yes.
That parking lot is a lifeline for the Dinky, it's a lifeline
But,
for
but the big
commuters
lot,
in
the
city.
the big lot is the university lot, not the Dinky lot.
Yeah, that's a solar panel site now, isn't it?
Yes.
Yes. Yeah,
Yeah, it's
Which
a
one
horrible
is-
use of land.
Like that parking lot?
the
Am I
surface
pointing
parking.
it the wrong way?
This is all surface parking lot for the university,
Yeah,
Yeah, where is the Dinky parking lot?
right here.
the one that says keep
Oh, it's
parking.
just a tiny little lot.
It's that little lot, it's that
Yeah.
little lot there. I mean, this whole thing is, again, what do you do, what do you do with surface parking lots?
You could put a large structure over it.
Okay, all right.
Absolutely.
Then my comment is,
Oh, absolutely. I mean, anything that's a surface parking lot can convert it to mixed use.
I mean,
Period.
with the train station there, it's like a no-brainer that this
Yeah.
should be like some big transit center, mixed use. You could bring the arts in because there's already a bunch in that
You mean
zone
like the arts and
already.
transit development?
And
Yeah.
you could have, you know, people who are dying to come to Princeton to, you know, all kinds of performances and art shows and, you know, really cool area to live, to work, and for people, other people to come and they could use the train and get there and do their thing and go out to a restaurant. It would be super.
Yeah. Okay.
I
I
would-
have one other
Okay,
quick
sorry.
question for you, Tony. In May is when this happened?
Yes.
Who are the people who did this and how did they get invited to do it?
It was a Princeton Future open public
Oh,
meeting.
I missed
At the library, right?
At the library, it was the last
It
one,
was in
April.
the last one we had
Okay.
at the library, and it was
It
a
was,
pretty.
it was well advertised
Yeah,
through
yeah,
the
I
local
just missed
papers.
it.
I,
Okay.
I'm not saying I went, but I knew it
Yeah,
happened.
no, and we had a lot of incredible input, a lot of discussion, and in fact, I thought we could rotate, you know, more than 3 times with the group, but I mean, they got so intensely involved. You saw it in the video. I mean, it really, people really got really nitty gritty
Yeah.
down to the little detail. And quite honestly, all of the maps are up there on the piano, if everybody wants them. But boy, oh boy, was that a job, because you had to lay it out, figure it out, and then translate his thing to PowerPoint and be as honest, you know, and as accurate as you possibly could. But, I mean, this is what we found out, and so that's the piece of it. So now, in kind of the overall, there was some recommendations for the overall area. But this is probably one of the biggest ones.
Yeah,
Connect the zoning to eliminate non-conformance in many
Correct.
neighborhoods.
yeah.
I mean, places on Moore Street, you gotta go to the zoning board, because the side yard variances don't make any sense. 85% and 90% of Witherspoon Jackson is illegal.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just amazing how obsolete the zoning is for this town.
But most of the borough zoning is that way.
It just,
I mean,
yeah,
it's crazy.
it's just crazy, so it needs to be redone. Now, and this one also came up on many, many of them. Allow duplexes rather than all single-family non-conforming lots. Consider more two-family dwelling zones. I mean, you know, I live in a house that's got 2 units in it, beautiful, 2 entrances, 2 porches. There's no reason why that couldn't fit into the context of single-family residential areas, none whatsoever. Anyway, I thought this was a pretty interesting one. Allow ADUs everywhere, support zoning fixes for ADUs front and rear yard setback. Now, they're allowed, but there's no regulations for them. I mean, there's no regulations for them. So what do you do now? You go before the zoning board.
Yeah.
There are plenty of regulations.
No, they're not, it's only, they just allow them, but there's not a sufficient amount of regulations to be able to do it. Allow neighborhood stores within reasonable walking distance. I thought that was, that would actually, but sorry. And then, I'll go through now, I'll just open up. Make areas bikeable, more bike racks, safe route to schools, walking and bicycles, more pocket parks, more pedestrian paths. These were the kind of the overall general stuff that kind of appeared on many, many of the maps. Yes, Josh?
So, I mean, the one thing, it didn't come up that day, but I mean, I've been encountering this over and over again. I think that one of the things that Princeton has to do is, you know, we have, I think it's 22 affordable areas right now, historic zones right now within town. And I think we desperately need to put guidelines in place for those areas.
Oh, boy.
Because if they are truly worth preserving, then instead of being inconsistent and random with reviews of each and every one of them, if there were guidelines in place, then you'd be able to preserve those areas. And at the same time, you know, develop areas that are not
Say
historic.
that we've used this technique now roughly 250 towns all across the United States, South Africa, Iceland. I mean, we've used it all over the place, and we still use the same thing. Susceptibility to change, not clear as to what those changes were. The next step in the process is to really to do that. And in order to do that, we got a general idea this morning of what some of the stuff is, which was great. What really should happen next is to go back to those maps with a trace of paper on top of it, and then force those changes, and then you follow through. And I will be perfectly candid with you guys. Princeton Future has already done an awful lot of what we call doodles on these sites. None of you have seen them. None of you have seen them. A few people from the board have seen them, but that's about it. I think the planning board or some of the people on the council have actually seen them, some thoughts about what could happen in certain areas. To Heidi's point, she's absolutely 100%, 110% correct. We can't do zoning in just in words. We need a form-based code that really shows what this place is like in 3 dimensions. Now, Josh has done one of those major maps. He has taken his firm every building in downtown and extracted it in 3 dimensions. He's already got that done. I will bet you a dime to a donut that Clark, Caton, and Hintz is not even close to anything like that. And already he's got it.
Right.
I mean, so it seems to me that if you're going to present before a board, and having been on a planning board and consulted to planning boards, I completely agree. Most people, including the students I taught for years, cannot read a 2-dimensional plan. They can't see a plan and imagine it in 3 dimensions. Then you put it in elevation and they're completely confused. Where does this fit? North, south, east, west. They can't imagine. But then, all these new tools that allow you to pull the stuff up, at least in basic blocks, which Josh has done, and then the tools now allow you to walk through it. Why aren't we using that? I mean, I don't mean to criticize the town, but the town doesn't even have basic GIS stuff yet.
But like she said, they do it after the fact,
Exactly.
when it's already too late.
And
So
then it's too,
anyway,
and then
you
it's
can't
too
say
late.
anything
But
about it.
I guess what I'm saying is that the new zoning, the new master plan, could require that. Period.
And it seems to me that you are all making very, very useful comments that need to be made to the leadership in the town government. And that's one thing that many of us are guilty of. We do not, we gripe at home, we complain to our friends, but we don't take the comments to the people who can actually use them. And that, I think, is the lesson from today. Tony, thank you so much. This was excellent, excellent. I also want to thank our videographer, Lance Roman. And I guess the question for us all is, you know, what kind of a town do you want to live in? People seem to want to live in places that are affordable, vibrant, equitable, sustainable, right? All those are good things. So the question is, are we there yet? And the answer doesn't sound like we're quite there yet. So talk to your friends, influence the politicians, use your vote to make yourselves
I think
known.
influencing the politicians, you need a big group. You can't just individually go because it's a very dysfunctional.
Well, you'd also be
And I would
surprised
say
at
that
how.
Princeton is a very, from my experience, Princeton in general is a very vocal community. I mean, if you show up at the town council meetings on any consistent basis, people are always, you know, expressing their concerns and their interests. And whether or not you're talking in the public forum or going to the council people individually, you know, I think that in general, Princeton is very vocal. The thing is that how you convince them to actually make the change is the big challenge. And they look at it, well, they don't want to affect the taxes overly because then they're not going to get reelected.
Right.
And so many decisions end up coming down to that simple math.
But we know that politicians are susceptible to change, okay? So think about that. Thank you all for coming out today. This has been a terrific, terrific thing. We're going to want to see you again, I hope, on October 22nd, when we talk about public lands and open space, because that was clearly an important topic today. So have a wonderful weekend and talk to some politicians.
What I think Richard and I would agree is that